Good morning, Highlands Presbyterian, on this third Sunday in Advent. Our gospel reading for today is from the 12th chapter of Luke. We're going to pick up in verse 13, and we're going to go through verse 21. Hear now the word of the Lord. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." But Jesus said to him, "Man, who made me a judge or arbitrator over you?" And Jesus said to them, "Take care, and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." And Jesus told them a parable, saying, "The land of a rich man produced plentifully. And he thought to himself, 'What shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops.' And he said, 'I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones. And there I will store all my grain and my goods, and I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'Fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich towards God.'" This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So the first Sunday in Advent, we focused on how we could have hope in the face of despair in ways we understand the support for our faith. Second Sunday in Advent, we talked about how we can have hope in the face of disease and what it means when we suffer in life, and how we understand that in light of God's relationship with us and God's willingness to suffer with us, for us. So today is the third Sunday in Advent. Today we light the candle of joy. And today we're going to talk about how we have hope, how we have Advent hope in the face of uneven distribution. We live in a world where people have wealth beyond what we can even imagine. And we live in a world of vast poverty. And the world has been like this for a long time. I recently finished reading Ron Chernow's biography of John Rockefeller. John Rockefeller, when he died, in today's values, would have had $340 billion. And towards when John Rockefeller was in his 50s, he started giving money away. He'd always given money away, but it became this huge effort, and it was a ton of work, and he set up the Rockefeller Foundation because it was a full-time job trying to give money away, and he still kept accumulating more money than we can even imagine. If today's worship service takes about an hour, in that time, Jeff Bezos will earn roughly $13.4 million. At the same time, 77% of Ohio's regional homeless services, these systems lack the confidence that they will have adequate housing for everyone who needs it this coming winter. So how do we understand our relationship with money in light of the incredible uneven distribution of it? How do we understand how we are Christians in light of whatever financial resources we have? And so in today's gospel reading, a man comes to Jesus with a family dispute about money. Jesus doesn't intervene in the dispute, instead trying to lift the crowd's eyes from focusing too much on money and things and thinking about, as he says, being rich towards God. Jesus warns us against all types of covetousness. Coveting is different than wanting something. To admire things, to desire things, to work for things, this is good and natural and healthy, but to covet them. To covet them is when that desire begins to take over your life, to shape you, to control you, when the desire for that thing is what is driving you. It's the difference between having a goal and letting that goal possess you. Right? When I think about normal life, I watched the Columbus Crew win the championship last night, and it was wonderful. I wanted them to win. But if they hadn't won, I would have been able to sleep at night. It would not have ruined my life. Right? We think about Christmas season. It is every year becoming more and more a material event happening. Right? The kids have seen the same commercials so many times. They're singing them at the dinner table. They know them by heart. We are bombarded by marketing. All of it designed to control our desires, to drive us. If you don't believe me, click on an online ad somewhere. Click on an online ad on Facebook, and you will realize you will see ads for that everywhere. It's almost to the point where if you even think about an item within 10 feet of your phone, for the next month, you will do nothing but see ads for that thing, right? The marketing, it tries to drive us to get our appetites going to where that's all we can think about until we purchase, we begin to covet. And Jesus warns us, he warns us against all types of covetousness. Anything that is driving us, a desire for a thing, a person, a position, a status. And so he tells this story about a rich man whose crops have produced plentifully. And so he had more than he needed, and so he had a decision to make. What does he do with the extra? And what he does is he decides to tear down his current barns and build bigger barns to store up the grain for the future. And he says, soul, you have ample goods laid up. For many years, relax, eat, drink, and be merry. He thinks he has bought himself all the security that he needs. But what he doesn't realize is that this earthly treasure cannot secure for him riches towards God. Jesus calls him a fool. He hasn't considered what his true needs are, and the type of wealth he has doesn't translate into the eternal wealth that Jesus is trying to get us to think about. And it's important to note that the Gospels are this incredibly rich and diverse resource when we think about how we talk about money. And Jesus talked about money a lot. And it ran the gamut from an incredibly poor widow putting 2 copper coins in the offering plate to Joseph of Arimathea, who was a wealthy man, who used his resources, used this new tomb he had to lay the body of Jesus, which worked out pretty well for Joseph because it turns out Jesus was only a temporary resident. So he gets the acclaim and he got to use the tomb again. Throughout Scripture, there is this undercurrent of an alternative economy that God is pointing us to. One in which, you who have no money are invited to come, buy, and eat. In which we are invited into God's kingdom, not based on what we have or based on what we can spend, but based on what Christ has done for us. Right? The world runs on dollars and cents, but God's economy runs on a different currency. And that currency, again, it's what Christ has done. Right? Wealth cannot be earned or bought. It can only be received. And so our status doesn't depend on wealth. Freed from striving for status or security, we're able to consider a different scorecard. We go from striving to finding satisfaction in being enough, in having enough. So the Gospels are incredibly diverse in how Jesus approaches different people at different levels of wealth. And it reminds me a little, the kids have been learning karate, the older two. And so they're doing online classes because everything is online anymore. And so what the instructor does is offers general instruction to the entire class. And so everyone is trying out the kicks and the punches and the moves. And then the instructor moves from person to person, offering personalized instruction because each person does it differently and each person gets a different thing right and each person gets a different thing wrong. Any good coach offers general instruction and then tailors that instruction to the individual to address their particular needs, their hurdles, their roadblocks. And Jesus is the same way in his instruction about money. He offers general guidance, but each of us holds money a little differently. Each of us stumbles at a different point when it comes to money. Each of us gets caught up on something different. And so that's why the instruction that you see is incredibly personal. Jesus tells one rich man to give everything away. He tells another who ends up giving half of it away. Some aren't given that same command. So Jesus realizes that we all get caught up on something different. But the purpose is all of us is Jesus trying to remove the stumbling block that we define ourselves, that we define our relationship with the world, that we define our status based on money. And so Jesus wants us to realize that in God we are enough. In God we have enough. And in so doing, when we receive more than what we expect, we don't get caught up coveting more and more and more. And then our blessing becomes a community blessing because we then share our blessings because we're not so anchored to it. We don't need it to define us. It's something for which we are so deeply grateful that we share it. So Rich Mullins was a songwriter some time ago. He wrote the song Awesome God. And he told his accountant he needed $24,000 a year. And he said anything beyond that, give away to the church, to various ministry groups. And he received far, far more than $24,000 a year. But he knew what enough he needed. He knew what was enough. And he knew that if he only kept getting more and more and more, it would change him. And so he set up a control where he didn't even see it. And he allowed enough to be enough. Right? It's a fundamental choice we make when it comes to money. It comes down to that choice. Do we want to live with the idea of more driving us, or do we want to live with the satisfaction of enough? Right? Your appetite only knows the word more. It's the voice that whispers in our hearts. It's that marketing voice that tries to drive us. It calls us to buy more, to consume more, to do more. It's the voice that tells the man to tear down his barns and build bigger ones. It's the voice that tells you you'll never have enough. You constantly need more. That is one choice. The other choice is rooted in enough. It's the voice that tells you you are enough. It's the voice that tells you you have enough. That you have defined what you need. You have defined who you are. Anything beyond that, your cup runneth over. It's a blessing you get to share with the community when the harvest comes in and is bountiful. You aren't tied to it. You don't need that to define you as successful, and so you're free to give it. You're free to share. You're free to bless. This is the choice that is free from coveting. Because you realize you have enough, and so you have peace. It's a life rooted in gratitude. And so when we practice gratitude daily, we're grateful for the things that we have, for the blessings that we have, and we're telling ourselves and we're telling the world that we have enough, that we are enough. And so I encourage you, practice this daily. Have some habit in your life where you sit down at some point and you realize the blessings in your life. And you exhale and you let go of the desires for more. When we look at the vast gaps in distribution of wealth in our country and in our world, may we start by looking at ourselves. May we as individuals, may we as a congregation come to the realization that because Christ died for us, because God has secured for us eternal wealth in God's kingdom, because we are rich towards God, we have the security we need. We are enough. We have enough. And in accepting this, may we fundamentally change our mindset from the idea of more driving us to being rooted in enough. And in so doing, may we think about what those blessings are that are beyond that. And may we think about how we can share those blessings. May we house the homeless, serve the orphans, care for widows. May we not seek bigger barns, but rather participate in the mission of God to proclaim the gospel through word and deed in every corner of the world. As our cup runneth over, may our blessings spill out from our cups into the cups of others who are thirsting for Advent hope during this Christmas season. Thanks be to God.